Hello students, today we are going to be taking notes on how we write equations from tables. Make sure you take notes as we go, and then you take the survey when you are done on the website. So in the class the past few days we have been taking equations and making tables out of them and then graphing them. So now we are going to go backwards and we're going to be given a table and we are now going to write the equation for them. When we write the equation, we want to write the equation in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. This is how all of our equations have been written, with the slope coming in front of the x and the y-intercept being the b value. In order to find our slope, we want to do the change in our y values divided by the change in our x values. When we find our change in our y values, that means we want to figure out what is happening to our y values as we go down the table. Then we'll write that number there. And then when we find our change in our x values, we want to figure out what's happening, what's the pattern in our x values. And then we'll write that number there. You may also see m called rise over run. So if we think about this, the rise is the y-axis, which is why our y value goes on top. That's our rise. That's how many we go up and down. And then our run is the x-axis, which is why that's on bottom, because that's our run. So that's how many we go left and right. The last component we need to write our y-intercept, or slope-intercept form, is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So again, that's the axis that's going up and down. We just need to figure out where is it crossing on that line. So some steps that we need to know to do this. You need to write these down. Number one, the first step is to always check to make sure that the x values are in ascending order from top to bottom. So we want our smallest numbers on the top, and then as they go down, they need to get bigger and bigger, and they need to go in order. Our second step is to identify the change in our y values. Remember, that's the top part of that ratio that we just wrote down on the last page. This little triangle is just another way to write change. So if you don't want to write out the word change, you can write the triangle. So the first thing we want to do is find our change in our y values, and then we want to find the change in our x values, and that'll help us find our m value. Whenever we do this, we always want to simplify. So if it can be simplified, you simplify it. If it can't, you just leave it as it is. But once we find our change in our y and we divide that by our change in our x, that's how we're finding our m value. Remember, we're dividing those. That second number we wanted to find was our y-intercept, so this is our fourth step. Remember, our y-intercept is when it crosses the y-axis. So in order to find an ordered pair that crosses the y-axis, the one that goes up and down, that means we're not going any to the left and we're not going any to the right. That just means we're staying on the x-axis. So that means our x-axis is 0, or our x value is 0. So then we just need to figure out how many we go up or down, depending on if it's a positive or a negative number. And our fifth step is to actually create the equation. So we have our m value, which we found up here with this. And then we have our b value, which we found wherever our x value was 0, we just plug that in for b. So let's do some examples. So our first step was to make sure our x values were in ascending order. As we go down here, our numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So we start with our smallest number on top and they go in order, so that is checked off. Our second step is to find the top number in our m ratio, or our slope ratio. So that was the change in our y values. Again, that little triangle just means change, so you can write out change if you want to, or you can write the triangle. So the change in our y values, we just want to find the pattern here. How do we get from 1 to 6? Well, we add 5. How do we get from 6 to 11? We add 5. How do we get from 11 to 16? We add 5. And 16 to 21, we add 5. If it's not doing the same thing the whole time, then you do not have a linear function and you need to stop. Alright, so our change in our y values is 5. Then we want to go over here and do the same thing for our x values, and we can see as our x values go down, we are always adding 1 here. So that's the change in our y values. And then if we can simplify, we want to, which we can here. 5 divided by 1 gives us 5. The next step after we find our change in our y, change in our x, and simplify is we want to find our b value, because remember we are trying to find y equals mx plus b. So our b value is when what value is 0? That would be our x value. So if we look to see when our x value is 0, we see that our y value is 6. So that means our b value for this one is 6. So then our last step is to just substitute the values in. So we have y equals, our m value is 5x, and then our b value is a positive 6, so we have plus 6. And that is our equation. Example number 2. Again, make sure our x values go into ascending order, which they do. It starts the smallest at the top and it goes in order as we go down. Our next number we want to find is our m value. So we need to find the change in our y values and divide that by the change in our x values. So as we go down, the y values, they're changing, but how are they changing? Well, to get from -1 to 1, we subtract. Sorry, we're adding here. Don't want to add. We are subtracting 2. To get from -2 to -3, we are subtracting 2. To get from -3 to -5, we are subtracting 2. And then -5 to -7, we are subtracting 2. So up here for our change in our y values, we want to have a -2. Now if we look at our x values as we go down, -6 to -3, we are adding 3. -3 to 0, adding 3. And 3 to 6, and 0 to 3. So we are adding 3 the entire time, so we're going to do a -2 divided by 3. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 3 does not go into 2 evenly, so we have a -2/3. The second number we want to find is our b value. Our b value is when x is 0. What is our y value? Well, we see here that when x is 0, our y value is a -3. So we're going to have a y equals -2/3 x. And since it's a -3, we have subtracting 3 on this one. Alright, now our next example we see here, we still want y equals mx plus b. So our m value is our change in our y divided by our change in our x. As we see here, our y values, they are constantly, we're adding 0. They're pretty constant here. We have all 2's. So our change in our y is adding 0. Our change in our x values, which they are in ascending order, we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are going in order. We are adding 1 each time. So our m is 0 divided by 1, which is 0. Our b value, or our y-intercept here, is whenever x is 0, what is our y value? Well, in this case, it's a positive 2. So to write our equation, we have y equals 0x plus 2. Now, whenever we have 0x, we actually don't have to write that at all, and we could just say y equals 2. Alright, our next step, sorry, my little notifications keep popping up. Last example, woo, now we're going backwards. So we have y equals mx plus b. Well, on this one, our change in our y values divided by our change in our x values is going to be our m value. So our change in our y values, we're going from 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. So we are adding 1 each time. So it's going to be 1 divided by our x values. This time are not changing. So we are adding 0 each time because they don't change. And 1 divided by 0, we cannot do this. So this is called undefined. because we are not allowed to divide by 0. So since this is undefined, that means that our y value is not there. So we're just going to have x equals -3. Because no matter what our y values are, our x values are always -3. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them tomorrow, and then make sure you complete that survey on the internet. Here are the survey questions if you do not have access to the internet or if your survey is not working. See you tomorrow.